On Tuesday, the General Conference of the United Methodist Church began a 10-day meeting in Charlotte. General Conference is a quadrennial gathering of elected delegates from all over the world, both laity and clergy. General Conference is the lawmaking body of our denomination, the equivalent of the federal government's executive and legislative branches combined. Decisions made at General Conference are incorporated into our United Methodist Book of Discipline. The discipline, as it's called, contains our official doctrine, known as the Articles of Religion and Confession of Faith, our official positions on important issues, known as the social principles, and our church bylaws, including our Constitution and restrictive rules. The most recent regular quadrennial General Conference was held in Portland, Oregon in 2016. The central issue there was, as it has been since 1972, sexuality. The church's position on homosexuality, same-sex marriage, and the ordination of LGBTQ persons was debated. General Conference 2016 resulted in a narrowly decided affirmation that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching and that same-sex marriage and LGBTQ ordination are prohibited. After an in-depth period of dialogue and study, a special session of General Conference was held in St. Louis in 2019. The sole purpose of the special session was to make a definitive determination of the church's position on sexuality. In 2019, plans to make the church more inclusive were railroaded, and the so-called traditional position was once again narrowly affirmed. But this time, penalties were increased both for openly LGBTQ clergy and for clergy who perform same-sex services. In addition, a paragraph was added to the discipline, making it easier for congregations to disaffiliate or leave the United Methodist Church. The doubling down on exclusion created a backlash in the American church. At annual conference sessions throughout the United States during the summer of 2019, delegates were elected for the next regular General Conference in 2020. Majority progressive delegations were elected in about 70% of the annual conferences. For example, in the North Carolina Conference, all but one of our new delegates were progressive or moderate. This increased the likelihood of a change in the United Methodist Church's official position on sexuality in 2020. Then, in March 2020, COVID-19 struck and General Conference was postponed. A virtual General Conference wasn't feasible because internet capabilities are severely limited in many places outside Europe and North America. Faced with likely defeat at the next General Conference, traditionalists within the denomination created their own new denomination in May 2020, the Global Methodist Church, and began pressuring annual conferences to implement the new disaffiliation measures. COVID held on, and because of travel restrictions and difficulties getting visas, General Conference was postponed again in 2021 and 2022 and finally rescheduled for 2024. Disaffiliation procedures were implemented in most annual conferences in late 2022, and the great exodus of the traditionalists began. Worldwide, the United Methodist Church has now lost a fourth of its congregations. In politically conservative North Carolina, the percentage is higher. New Bern has been hit particularly hard by disaffiliation and the hard feelings associated with church division. Sexuality is once again on the General Conference agenda in Charlotte. There are proposals to remove restrictive language from the Book of Discipline and revise the social principles. There's also a proposal to regionalize the worldwide church. The United Methodist Church currently consists of many annual conferences in the United States and central conferences overseas. There are issues with this form of organization. For one, General Conference usually spends a disproportionate amount of time on concerns of interest only to Americans. Also, central conferences have limited authority to modify parts of the discipline to fit their particular cultural situation, but American annual conferences have no such authority. To address these problems, there's a proposal to regionalize the United Methodist Church. All the annual conferences in the United States would be grouped together in a region separate from the central conferences, which would be redesignated as regions. There would be 4 resulting regions: Africa, Europe, the Philippines, and the United States. While there would be a general book of discipline for our doctrine, constitution, and other things we all have in common, each region would have the authority to decide for itself on other culturally unique issues. If regionalization passes in Charlotte, the Constitution of the United Methodist Church will have to be changed, and each annual conference and central conference will vote on amendments at their next meeting. Regionalization will only become church law if approved by 2/3 of all the annual and central conferences. In addition to the 3 R's, remove restrictive language from the discipline, revise the social principles, and regionalize the worldwide church, there are also proposals sponsored by global Methodist affiliated groups to renew the disaffiliation procedures that expired in 2023. These proposals are expected to be soundly defeated. General Conference meetings and possible changes in the Book of Discipline are usually sources of anxiety among United Methodists. Progressives hope for changes leading to more inclusion. Traditionalists fear the changes will be unacceptable to them. What will be the likely outcome of this General Conference? The traditionalists' greatest fear, that churches will be forced to allow same-sex weddings and accept LGBTQ pastors, will not happen. That kind of change has never been forced upon pastors, churches, or boards of ordained ministry. As always, churches will retain the freedom to set their own wedding policies. Pastors will have the authority to decide who they'll marry, and the bishop and cabinet will appoint pastors only where they can be effective, and churches will accept them. Please don't believe the fear-mongering you may have heard about these things. What will probably happen is that given so many traditionalists have already left the United Methodist Church, the narrow margin that affirmed a more exclusive position in 2016 will probably become a margin to affirm a more inclusive position in 2024. While nothing is certain in church politics, it's likely that 2 of the 3 R's, removal and revision, will pass. The question many may ask is, what will Centenary Church do after General Conference? For example, what if the language prohibiting same-sex marriage is removed from the Book of Discipline? First, no action will be taken until after the North Carolina Annual Conference meets in Greenville in June, because our annual conference may offer guidelines to help churches address the new situation. Second, I assure you that no unilateral decree will come from me. I was appointed to serve as this congregation's administrative officer and ordained spiritual leader, not its king. I'll consult with church leaders immediately following General Conference to begin discerning a strategy for moving forward. The first church council meeting after annual conference would be the first at which any action could be taken. Third, I'm already praying about a way for Centenary to come together as a church family to discuss General Conference actions that may affect us, to discuss them, not to argue about them, to share both our concerns and our hopes for the future, to discern a path forward. I don't yet know exactly what that process will look like, but I pray it'll look like a loving family seeking to include all who want to call Centenary home and keep us all together at the Lord's table. In our 252 years, Centenary has weathered the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, 2 world wars, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. We've survived hurricane after hurricane, a fire in our sanctuary, a fire that burned most of New Bern, and not 1 but 2 global pandemics. We've stayed together in mission through economic downturns, racial unrest, and the rapid social changes that began in the 1960s and continue to this day. The issue of sexuality isn't by any means the hardest thing we faced as a church. If all those other challenges didn't break us, this one need not be a source of heartache or division. Like those other trials, this should be seen as an opportunity for us to become stronger, more faithful to the gospel of love, and more united in our convictions and commitment to Christ. We met the threat of disaffiliation head on without fear. Early in that crisis, we decided we wouldn't draw a line in the sand and force our people to choose which side to stand on. By acclamation, we chose not to hold a contentious vote, trusting that by God's grace, we're stronger than the forces that seek to conquer us. We discerned that our witness in this community was too important to damage by entering into an unnecessary and hurtful process of separation from my beloved brothers and sisters remaining in the United Methodist Church. We acknowledged that our continuing call is to love one another as the body of Christ. And we claimed, and we still claim, God's promise that no weapon formed against us shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against us in judgment God shall condemn. That is our heritage as servants of the Lord. Many have told me over the last year that this season of unity and renewal has been one of the most exciting and hopeful at Centenary in a long time. We've grown in numbers, in outreach, and in our joy for the Lord. My hope and prayer for Centenary is that we will continue to move forward in that same spirit. Hold our United Methodist General Conference in your prayers until it adjourns on May the 3rd. And as always, pray for Centenary. Thank you, and God bless you all.